With so much talk about a changing world order, especially after what has happened in Afghanistan and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is time perhaps for the world to pay closer attention to Chinese expansionism. Of course, the world is already doing this, but how much do we really understand, for example, about China's intelligence services? Well, you need to go no further than to pick up a book recently translated into English on Chinese spies. Its author, investigative journalist Roger Faligot, argues that the Chinese expansionism is now evident in the way that it is building and scaling its intelligence services. A fascinating book. Basically, the author argues that this spy system, as it were, is now competitive to not just the CIA, but also to other spy services across the world, including the R&AW, Mossad, MI6, and what have you. To understand the new face, as it were, of Chinese spies and the Chinese espionage system, we're joined by the author himself. Thank you very much. Enjoyed reading your book, learned a lot from it. If you had to sort of define what's the one thing that the rest of the world does not understand about how China is building its intelligence apparatus, what would you say that is?
I would say, well, simply that after the end of the Cold War, with the self-destruction of the Soviet intelligence service, the Chinese decided that they would go from a regional intelligence organization to a worldwide organization to go along with their economic expansion and strategic and military expansion. So they've totally rebuilt their intelligence services. And very lately, Mr. Xi Jinping organized a major new organization of the military, of the People's Liberation Army, and also of the civilian intelligence outfits, such as the State Security Ministry, known as Guanbu in Chinese.
Yes. And you, of course, also talk about how China is building the largest and in some ways the most perhaps aggressive military in the world, and not enough attention is being paid to this. What do you think have been the significant changes and how China is using its espionage system? You've spoken about cyber warfare, you've spoken about economic espionage, that you think that the world isn't cognizant of?
Well, there are naturally several layers, and various countries they are interested in fighting against in a very more or less violent ways. If you take Europe, they started by major organizations in terms of business intelligence, of scientific and technological intelligence that they would try to get in order to broaden their scope for their own economic development. The same applies naturally for major countries such as India. But on top of that, there is the neighborhood of India, which means that it has become also a major target on, I would say, military, cyber warfare, and also economic aspects. And also the other thing, which is very important, is China, by the late 90s, and in this new century, they decided to organize new organizations with countries such as Pakistan, with countries like Iran, and naturally with Russia, with major exchange of intelligence, of informations. And naturally, they played a major role, for instance, in supporting the activities of the Afghan Mujahideen, the Afghan Islamist organizations, and naturally that good connections with the Taliban, for instance.
Yes, in fact, among the first countries to receive the Taliban delegation were the Chinese, and there is concern now of a changing world order, which would see a Russia-China axis. Do you see that?
Well, yes, of course, in a way, but at the same time, one has got to be very cautious in saying those things. For instance, you know, the Chinese intelligence services of the Communist Party, this is what we are talking about, was set up in the 1920s, that is almost a century ago, by the Soviet intelligence, helping the young, newly born Chinese Communist Party to organize itself. And as you know, with Mao Zedong, with the later President Mao Zedong, after 49, when the People's Republic of China was set up, again was helped by Soviet intelligence, both what we call the KGB, the Internal Secret Service, and they copied the Soviets in setting up their own organizations, and also militarily-wise with the military intelligence services. But after a while, as you know, there were also infights, feuds between the Chinese and the Soviets in the 60s, 70s. So we've got to see that at times they do get together, and at times they are also rivals.
Yeah.
For the time, it is a bit different with the Ukrainian situation, actually.
The book has a fascinating account of how the CIA lost, or rather had its sources and spies outed by the Chinese, and the Chinese in a counter operation, in fact, punished these people who had, in fact, worked for the Americans in a very, very visible and brutal way. Can you give us an insight into how the CIA, in that sense, was called out by the Chinese in a kind of counter-espionage move?
Well, it is naturally difficult to know everything about those things. As you know, by definition, they are secret. But we know that a fair amount of intelligence operations have been mounted by the Europeans and the Americans. And they succeeded into getting people at the top of counterintelligence of China. And some of them became, as we know, moles, and they became spies for America. But at the same time, some of them became double agents and, in fact, spied for the Chinese against America. I know it's a bit complicated, but this is how the secret war games operate. And lately, this has meant, in effect, that Xi Jinping had to organize a major purge within the People's Liberation Army intelligence service and within the R&AW, the State Security Ministry. That has weakened, in a way, the Chinese intelligence service. And on top of that, don't forget the COVID-19 situation in which many intelligence operations have been cancelled. Naturally, some people died among the Chinese intelligence operatives like any other population, but also it was very difficult to mount operations of intelligence without planes, with the lockdown in many countries. So it is a very strange situation. And also, it means there is, at the moment, a major, I would say, faction fight within the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, and that includes the intelligence services.
That's very interesting. There's also been a suggestion by other scholars who have done work on China that Xi Jinping is actually looking to merge the separation between the party and the government, and obviously by amending the rules is also looking to be at the helm of China for a long time to come. How do you see the sort of espionage system changing under him and China's ambitions merging with his own ambitions as he continues to be at the helm of affairs, perhaps for the foreseeable future?
Yes, just before replying to your question, just a little thing. Xi Jinping, when he was a young man, during the Cultural Revolution, his father was purged and sent abroad in the countryside. And he saw himself the disorganization of the Chinese intelligence service during the Cultural Revolution. That is, a fight between Mao Zedong and other factions. So nowadays, he doesn't want to start that again. But in 2012, when he came to power in a way, as a leader of the Communist Party, as a leader of the country, and as a leader of the Central Military Commission, he started by a major purge, saying there was an attempted coup against himself, led by the mayor from Chongqing, Mr. Bo Xilai, and from the leader of the intelligence services, Mr. Zhou Yongkang. So those people are now in jail. And there were major purges within the army, the People's Liberation Army, and within the state security apparatus. And then he decided to reorganize the army. In 2016, the People's Liberation Army was totally reorganized. And all the, I would say, intelligence outfits, including the cyber warfare, including the satellite warfare and other intelligence services were reorganized in what is called a special force of the People's Liberation Army. And he's trying to get it much more concentrated. And naturally, also, he's fearing, like many other leaders before him, that some other leaders within the Communist Party leadership would use sections of the Communist intelligence service and the state security to get him ousted. And naturally, at the end of this year, we will see the new 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. He's trying to get everything concentrated into his hands.
Yeah.
Is he going to win or not? We will see. I'm not a prophet.
Yeah. One last question to you. In democracies, it is obviously easier for the spies of other countries to, in a sense, grow roots. China is a tightly controlled society, as your book reminds us. Even those who use the internet have to register themselves with the government. How difficult do you think it is for other countries, therefore, to cull information out of China, to have their own spy networks be able to effectively work in China?
Well, I would say I'm lucky enough that my book, as an introduction by Mr. Vikram Sood, who was the leader and director of your own intelligence service, the R&AW. Why I'm saying this is because in your country, there's a certain amount of control, of the parliamentary control or political control over the operations of our secret services. And we can exchange information, and we can do many things that, including yourself and myself as a journalist as well, we are able to write about those things. Now, well, you just cannot do that in China. And the place, for instance, a few months ago, I still had books coming from Hong Kong and intelligence information as a journalist coming from there. It is extremely difficult now that it has been totally enclosed, a total lockdown, not only a anti-COVID lockdown, also a political and I would say security lockdown. Again, the same thing applies to the unfortunate plight of the Uyghur in Xinjiang.
Yes.
This week, as we are talking, there is a commission from the United Nations going there to see what are the human rights of those unhappy Uyghurs stampeded upon. Now, I don't know what will happen there, but we can see we can do many things. It's extremely difficult to get information from China and on Chinese intelligence services, obviously.
Well, I think as your book reminds us, this is implications for the entire world. A fascinating book. Thank you so much, Mr. Faligot. Pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.